Hopefully this will be straightforward. There we go. Okay. So a quick procedural note is I like to put QR codes on my slides. This one links to the whole slide deck. This is just a web page. Feel free to take a picture of that, and you can follow along because I might be skipping through these slides, and I don't want you to miss out on the opportunity. But there's also the URL there, and they're all short URLs, k9l.io/badcss. That's the slides, and I will be using them to cite references along the way. But as I say, I might skip over them. So with that said, hello, my name is Keith Cirkel, and I am bad at CSS. It's true. It says so on my GitHub profile right here. It hasn't always said that. This is the way back archive from January 24, and I was just bad at JavaScript and HTML back then. And so it's been a journey. The journey started about 2 years ago when I realized how bad I was at CSS, and so I thought the only responsible thing to do is to write a CSS parser. And so I wrote a little CSS parser, or in this case Alexa, that just gets the raw syntax, and I wrote it in JavaScript just to kind of get a feel for like CSS syntax and what CSS can do. And then that kind of ballooned, and so we're now at like roughly 500,000 lines of Rust code. And it's called CSS Kit, and it does loads of interesting things like it minifies and it does formatting and linting, and it's also got like CSS variant languages. I decided to just write another CSS style language inside of it just for linting. But anyways, I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about how unhinged CSS can be. But just to give you a kind of flavor of who I am, my day job, which I recently acquired in 2025, was to work at Mozilla on Firefox. And so I'm a contributor to the Firefox engine, including CSS inside the Firefox engine. I implemented anchor center alignment properties of anchor positioning, if you've heard of anchor positioning. I worked a bit on that. I've worked a bit on other features. All this to say is that I spend a lot of time thinking about CSS in my day job and afterwards. And so I don't want you to get the wrong idea that I'm not bad at CSS like I don't know CSS. I'm bad at CSS in that I have a particular set of skills. And you kind of have to know how CSS works to be bad at it. Like there are a lot of people who are like mid at CSS. There are a lot of good people at CSS who can write good CSS. I think that there's less people who can write bad CSS, but it's okay because I'm going to teach you a few tricks. Okay, so here is CSS. We all know this, right? Does everyone understand this? Is anyone like, uh-oh, I'm in the wrong talk? This is CSS. This is some very straightforward CSS. How does something like a browser take this and like turn it into something useful? So nerd alert, we're going to go on a bit of a parser theory tangent. You're going to get raw characters, like raw text data, when you look at CSS, and you're going to do something with that. What you're going to do, the first thing you need to do is tokenize this. And this has been like a thing since like the 60s. Anytime you want to write a programming language, you take this raw character data and you tokenize it into something a bit more sensible. And so you'll read character by character and you'll say, does this make up an ident or an identifier? This is white space, punctuation, and then CSS has some other quirky ones like functions and dimensions. Not all languages have dimensions. Most have things like numbers and different types of numbers, but CSS had dimensions. From here, you can kind of take this like raw stream of individual tokens and you can kind of turn it into a tree. One might call that a syntax tree. You might even call it an abstract syntax tree, and that's generally what it's referred to as. And CSS actually has a specific name for this called component values, and this is important, and we're going to get to why a little bit later on. If you're going to make a really robust project to do like really interesting things with CSS, you're probably going to look at other higher order intermediate representations, and most parsers and things will take that kind of AST and turn it into something a bit more interesting, and they'll tag it with things like this is a selector, this is a style rule in the case of CSS. And all of this is totally straightforward, right? There's standards that exist that tell you how to do these things, and this particular standard, CSS syntax 3, this is one of the dozens of modules that specify CSS. This one is just about CSS, the programming language. It doesn't cover things like what a selector is or like what declarations are, but what it does cover is like how you parse CSS. And so you can take this, read it cover to cover, or get an AI to read it cover to cover, and out the other end, you can make a CSS parser, and that's what I did with CSS Lex, right? That was a JavaScript parser. I spent a couple of weekends with this in my web browser and with my JavaScript in my IDE, and I made a parser. Like I say, this doesn't give you any of the rules. There are thousands of declarations and keywords and all that kind of stuff across dozens of other specs that you would need to read to write a full engine. And yeah. Anyways, it comes with really interesting diagrams, and these are called railroad diagrams. And these are kind of how you convert all of that character data into tokens. And so this is the railroad diagram for an identifier token. So if you want to know how to do a keyword in CSS, this is how it works. And so you're a little train, and you're going down the train track, and there's a switch in the road, and you have to decide which way you go down. It's kind of a finite state machine. You just make a decision. Do you see a dash? If you see a dash, you can go down this path. And then you can go down this path, and if you see an escape character, then that's still a valid identifier. And if you see an A to Z, then it's still a valid identifier. As you can see here, though, if you see a number, well, there's no railroad for the number, so you can't be a valid identifier if you've got a number as the first character. But once you see an A to Z, you can have numbers after that. So these are the rules that make up what an identifier is in CSS. And so we can make some reasoning about this. So we can say, well, 4 pixels, that's not an identifier, that's a dimension token, because there's a number at the beginning. px4, that is an identifier, that's a keyword, you could have that in CSS. Minus 4 pixels, that's a dimension token again. Although it starts with a minus, the second character is not an A to Z or a non-ASCII. Dash 4 pixels is a valid identifier. Minus 4 minus pixels is not a valid identifier for the same reasons. It's still a dimension token because the dimension unit, which is also an identifier, follows the same identifier rules, has the minus. Minus 4 pixels, now we've got a valid identifier because this dash dash means that we can skip to this block and we can start reading numbers, and that still constitutes a valid identifier. Dash dash foo is not a valid identifier. Why? Oh, because those aren't dashes. That's a Unicode EN dash. That's a different kind of dash. Minus 8 pixels. This is a valid identifier, and this is because this is a superscript 8. Not the number 8, but a different Unicode symbol entirely. And lots of Unicode symbols are allowed in the non-ASCII bucket and the escape codes. Dash dash, and this is a special character called an asterism. This one is not allowed. It's one of the few Unicode characters that's not allowed. So this is not a valid identifier. And it's kind of elided from this picture, but in the non-ASCII bucket, it has a bunch of Unicode ranges. This is one of them that's not allowed. But Zalgo is allowed, so you can write this as a valid identifier. P space X. There is no space character here. You cannot have spaces in an identifier. That's 2 separate identifiers. However, /00070 space /00078, that is a valid identifier. And that's because you can use escape codes. So what have we learned? Well, all of this is exactly the same CSS, written different times. So /h3, that's a valid identifier, and that resolves to h3, just like /06833. These are the Unicode escapes for h3. So all of this is exactly the same CSS. Should we go again? Number tokens. Okay, so number tokens have a slightly more complex railroad diagram, but hopefully you get the kind of picture, and we can say 4 is definitely not a number. 4 is a number. Everyone got that? 4 is not a number, 4 is a number. Yes, good. 4 divided by 2, well, the slash is not part of this. This is 2 number tokens separated by a delimiter. Minus 2.0 is a number because we say minus 2.0. 2.8.3, well, once you get to here, 2.8, there's no more dots. You can't have 2 dots in a number. So this is not a valid number. This is actually 2 numbers, 2.8 and then .3. 2e4, you're allowed scientific notation in CSS numbers. So this is a valid number. 2e, 4e5, same thing as the dots. You're only allowed 1e. Plus 2.000e plus 002 is a valid number. So again, we have the same CSS all over again. And because this is using a dimension, which is the combination of the 2 rules, a number rule and an identifier rule, all of these resolve to exactly the same number. So what can we do with this? Well, we can take a tool like CSS Kit and we can turn our wonderful, beautiful CSS into this mess. And then we can minify it back again. And so this becomes this. And this is valid CSS. This is totally valid CSS. If I take this...
Just looks like Tailwind.
Yes, yes. So here we are. I take this wonderful page, and we go to the inspector here, and we can see our declaration is here. And if I toggle it, you can see it is actually applying, it's parsing. There's the H2 rule, even though the CSS itself is a garbled mess, which you can see up here. I just hacked the URL. Okay, you're asking yourself, that's stupid, I'm never going to use that, right? Well, this is actually a really good thing for kind of red teaming, right? It's a good way to create all of these edge cases to figure out exactly why and how these rules work when presented with all the kind of tooling. And so I've written the tool CSS Kit to expand the CSS so that I can then look at the minifier and check that it's working. But also during writing these slides, I realized when I pasted this into Firefox, it was scrubbed out. I don't know if you saw that. There was a line on the dev tools, and that's because it's a bug in Firefox. So 6 days ago, we raised this bug, and we fixed it. But yeah, I also use it for CSS Kit, right? So this is a bug that I found when minifying, that we didn't always preserve the plus when we needed to, because sometimes the plus is needed, and sometimes it isn't in CSS because of rules that we don't need to worry about for now. But anyways, it helps us fix bugs. But also, there are practical reasons for this, mostly to do with historical things, but there are new projects, for example, Tailwind, that use this. And so this here is actually Tailwind's CSS. And so Tailwind gives you this kind of ergonomic class microsyntax in here by leveraging escape codes and slash to create identifiers in here. So these are all valid identifiers in CSS precisely because of these escaping rules. So it allows a different kind of set of ergonomics. All right, that's enough about character data. I think we can all agree. Let's look at tokens instead. So here, this was about AST component values. I referred to this earlier, and I said it was important, and it's important for a very big reason. If you've ever seen a custom declaration in CSS, it usually starts with dash dash and then your rule. This is actually component values. So browser engines will take all of those tokens and they will build up the AST, and whatever the value is, as long as it's a valid AST, it will be streamed back in. So when you have color var, what this is saying is this is a stand-in for a new AST to come in, and we save this representation and we just paste it on top. And this gives you some really interesting properties, because unlike, say, for example, JavaScript, where a variable can only be one value, and you would have to do something like create an array and kind of transpose an array, well, in CSS, variables can just be token streams. So you can have a dash dash RG be 255, 255. These three are valid tokens, even though that doesn't make a whole value. And I can have a blue as 255. And what this means is when I transpose both of these, suddenly I get a valid color syntax. And so this is legitimate CSS, this works. And so we can do really interesting things with this, because we can also do math on these values, right? And so we can have a condition which is set to the number 0, and we can multiply numbers, right? So 1 times 100 pixels is 100 pixels, where 0 times 100 pixels becomes 0. So what if I just times my condition by 100 pixels? Well, I'm going to get either 0 or 100 pixels, which means that I can do this kind of set property, and with a little bit of JavaScript, I have conditional logic in CSS. And so this can kind of be interesting, because you can do things entirely within CSS. For example, here, we've got an unread notification. And what I can do is I can take the number, the raw number, and just set it as a property. And I can just multiply the width and the height by a clamped version of this. So I'm calling min with a maximum value of 1. So this will resolve to either 0 or 1, even if unread is 4, which means that when I multiply that by 22 pixels, I get this consistent 22 pixels. And then I'm also using counter, reset, and content to render the number as text in here. So this is all done via CSS. There's no additional logic here. This is a complete example. Variables also allow this kind of fallback chaining. This should be quite familiar if you've used CSS before. This is really nice for design systems. But it's got some interesting rules around it because you can use the fallback if you kind of do a little bit of unhinged work, because initial is a special keyword. And initial means, well, it's actually something called the guaranteed invalid value, and it never resolves to anything. So it'll always use the fallback if something is initial. But off here is just a space token, and that's totally valid as a property, right? This is a completely valid piece of syntax. And so we can say, well, if this thing is raised, then if it's the on variable, it will use this value, but if it's the off variable, it will use that value. And that means you can do stuff like this with like hover states, where I'm just setting one property here is raised to on, and it's changing a bunch of states. And I mean, of course, you could just do it like this with a hover state and just write your declaration like a normal person, but why would you do this when you could do this? Okay, so we know variables are powerful, so let's just do some color math. Okay, right, okay, so we've got all of our constituent color parts as RGB values, and this means that when I set the background color, I can just take each of these individual values. So here's purple, here's yellow, yeah? Here's a custom one, and what I've done is whenever I change the sliders, the value of the color changes. And so I can do some really interesting stuff here because I can provide custom colors to my users. The problem is, this is not really contrasting very well. It doesn't meet WCAG guidelines. And so what I'd really like to do is set the color to black when it's a really light color, but contrast color isn't well supported. I mean, Firefox has obviously got it, but some of the other browsers, well, it's okay because we can just calculate Rec 709 luminance values, and we can form our own color contrast, right? We just take the luma coefficients, and we all know these, right? 2126, 7152, 07. No? No? Okay. Well, anyways, we take those and we just look at a threshold and we say if our luma coefficient, which is a single number that kind of gives us how light this color is, we just take this and we say if it's over 128, well, we'll just turn that into a 1. And if it's lower than 128, we'll turn that into a 0. And we'll use the same math trick we did before, but we'll multiply it by 255. So we'll either get 0 or 255. And this means now if I drag this slider around, if I find the right color, there we go, it goes white. And look, it's just X 3 times because it's black or white. That's kind of clever, isn't it? And you might think, that's stupid, no one's ever going to use this. This is github.com. Are you all familiar with github.com? This is the label preview. You get to pick a custom color for your label. Now, does everyone remember the Rec 709 luma coefficients? It was 2126, 7152, 0722. Yeah, this is our luma coefficient. It's called perceived lightness, but it's the exact same technique, just a little bit fancier because they've got this extra nice bit of contrast where it's using the same color. It's not using black or white. So why don't we do that? Why don't we do some more color maths? All right, so if we just take our RGB and we just linearize it, then we get linear RGB, and then we can convert that into long, medium, and short wavelengths, right? Okay, so then what we do is we take that and we convert that into OKLab, and then from OKLab it's just a really simple equation to convert that into OKLCH. And with our OKLCH, well, we can just take the lightness value, keep the chroma and the hue, and we'll just do the same trick, 2550, with the lightness value. And so now we've got an alternate color, which is kind of the same color as the foreground, but still nicely contrasting. We just needed an absolutely gargantuan amount of CSS for it. And you might think, this is stupid. No one's ever going to use that. And to that I say, thank you very much. I've been Keith Cirkel. I hope you enjoyed. And if you have any questions, I will be at the pub later as well. Thank you very much.
We actually have some time dedicated for Q&A.
I'm more than happy to. Just don't ask me anything about the slides, and we're good. Yeah.
Any questions from the room?
Hello.
This is more tangential since you worked with CSS kit, which is quite a large code base.
It is.
How do you find managing that, to be honest?
Well, it's okay because I've worked on other large code bases, so I'm kind of familiar with it. So yeah, CSS kit's like 500,000 lines of code roughly. It's a lot of code. Quite a bit of it's generated. And so actually, I mean, kind of what I did is instead of just parsing CSS, I also actually parse the CSS specs and generate code from the CSS specs. So not all of the Rust code is written by me. It's also I've written Rust code to write Rust code, which is kind of part of the course for Rust, if you've ever used Rust macros before. But I also work on other code bases. I work on Firefox. That's like 10, 20 million lines of code. It's far too much than any one person can put in their head, but you just kind of learn to deal and just operate by vibes, I guess. Yes. Hello.
Can that content contrast approach be made reusable? So like write once and use for many other UI components?
Yeah, so excuse me, you're asking if the color contrast can be made reusable. I mean, if you really want to use this kind of syntax, you're more than welcome to try and extract something reusable here. What I would recommend though is if we go back here, so contrast color is coming to the platform. There's also color mix, so you don't have to do this kind of color mixing thing. You can write a function that just says color mix this color in this color space, and the browsers will do all of this absolutely unhinged math for you, so you don't have to do any of that. Color mix, as far as I remember, is broadly available. Contrast color is not, but I think the Chromium engineers are working on it, so it should be available kind of this year. If you need to support Safari 16.4 or something, then you're probably going to have to resort to this, but you could probably make it reusable, is the short answer to that. Yes? Well, we're getting ifs, and we're getting apply, and we're getting functions very soon, so very close, yeah, yes. I don't know how I'm going to write any of that in CSS Kit, but we're going to find out. I saw a hand up here first, I think, yes?
Okay, so using SCSS and SAS, I feel it kind of has most of these functionalities embedded in it with
Yes.
functionals.
Agreed, yes.
Having a color contrast isn't the typing function, the license function.
Yes.
Why not, as a developer, why not just focus on using SCSS and SAS since it has most of these functionalities instead of doing it yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Roughly speaking, why would you not use SCSS and SAS instead of using CSS? I think a really big compelling use case for just using CSS is that all of this stuff happens in the browser. And what that means is you can interact with that in JavaScript. So for example, the example I showed where github.com gives you the color and it finds the right matching color contrast, you can't do that kind of thing in SAS because SAS is a preprocessor. And so it will take all of those variables and it does all of that stuff like the if conditions and stuff, and it spits out CSS based on those, right? So it's a programming language that generates CSS rather than being like a declarative language that does all of the ifs and conditionals and everything. So I think that's the kind of thing. As a side note for that, one of my aspirations for CSS Kit is to support SAS, and it will convert SAS into CSS, but it won't use the pre-processing step. It will kind of transpile SAS, because I hope that one day we can all use CSS and remove SAS, but that's just a secret goal of mine. Don't tell anyone. There was a hand up back here. Yes. There's pretty terrible performance benefits. Don't do like the escape code stuff because, where are we? This kind of stuff, it just wastes time. Browsers are pretty good at this. CSS Kit's pretty good at this because I spent a lot of time on it. But like it does slow them down because they have to go down through slow paths. Firefox is actually especially good at this kind of stuff because it's got some really cool techniques that they've done in Rust. But yeah, no, this is quite slow to tokenize. This kind of stuff, like generally speaking, calc and things, it happens at a different stage. And so if you just write 100 pixels, we can compute that ahead of time and we can just like hold the value of 100 pixels. If you write calc, we have to like store that whole thing and do a bunch of allocations and stuff. So it's not slow, and like don't get me wrong, like CSS is almost never the slowest thing you can write. It's almost always the fastest thing you can write. But if you're talking to a browser engineer, they'll say this thing in CSS is slow because that's relative to other CSS. But if you can write CSS instead of JavaScript, please write CSS instead of JavaScript, because as capable as all of the engineers are writing JavaScript, we also have capable CSS authors, and because it's a declarative language, it can go a lot faster. Hopefully that answers your question. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, I'll be done.
I got one.
Yes.
Yeah, the color contrast function, as far as I remember, it determines, like it checks the current color that you pass to the function, and it returns either white or black, but you cannot do like a semi-transparent green or something like that.
Quite right.
Yeah. Is that correct assumption?
That's correct. Yeah.
Is there any extension to color contrast function that allows you to, I don't know, use result to something different than white or black?
Yeah. So you'd have to use color mix, and so you might have to do some of this stuff. I mean, you wouldn't have to do most of this stuff, but if you just if you had the individual variables of a color component, like OKLCH, if you had the O, you could just do the math and clamp it to 0 or 255. And then you could use color mix to say, just give me the white, or you could even just say mix white into this color.
Oh, yeah, I see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So you could also use the contrast color function as an argument to color mix, if I'm quite sure that's correct. And so you could say, like, color mix my color against the contrast of my color, which will either return black or white, so that you're saying color mix black or white against my color based on the contrast of that color. So if you did color mix, color contrast, all in one function.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Any more questions? Oh yeah, Nabil?
Just one question. If you're building an app that's doing most of the client-side processing, this kind of thing sounds like it's quite suited for it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. I mean, again, don't use any of the examples here, but like, hopefully this gives you a bit of a platform to think about like CSS and variables, certainly in a different way, where you could say you can fit more stuff into CSS. But if you're writing this kind of code, there's probably a good like spec or explainer or upcoming feature somewhere where we're trying to make sure that you don't write that kind of stuff. But yeah, like certainly with ifs and functions that are coming in CSS in the next few years, I think you'll be able to do a lot more of this stuff a lot more expressively, and I would encourage you to do so, because CSS and HTML, as they're both declarative, browsers can absolutely chew through them compared to JavaScript.
Just one general question on Mozilla. How sort of concerned are they with the internet today? Like Tim Berners-Lee talks about the internet not being great,
Yeah.
being open source.
Yeah.
They're not really big on like cryptocurrency, and I can't understand.
Sure. Yeah.
Without like decentralized storage and that kind of thing, do you think
Yeah.
Mozilla will embed nodes and things in the browser? Or?
I mean, those are questions maybe like above my pay grade in a sense. Not that I don't have answers. I mean, the answers I have are my opinions, I guess, is the point, which is like, I think Firefox is a privacy-focused browser. We're concerned about like the user. We really care about the fact that it's the user's agent. You know, there's a reason it's called the user agent, and the first word is the really important bit of that. So it's always going to give you the absolute autonomy. So I guess I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
It's good for a hot conversation, man.
Yeah.
Any more questions to Keith? Wow, man. Go on.
Sure. Let's go.
Are there any CSS things that you would like to see people use more of?
Oh yeah.
I think from an attributes point of view, accessibility is quite low on developers' checklists. But
Sure.
is there anything in the CSS side of things that you might see through CSS kit that you think more people should or could be using?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess I think that selectors are really powerful. They're a really powerful matching engine, and people generally just tend to use classes. I'd love to see people use more of the other things. Having said that, and again, this is like an engineer's perspective, so relative to other CSS, non-class selectors are going to be a little bit slower, but it's going to be still orders of magnitude faster than anything else you can write. So, I mean, I think I got an article about this somewhere. CSS classes considered harmful, which is obviously a clickbaity title, but I would encourage you to read this post, which has more of that kind of opinion if you're interested in that. I guess that would be an answer to that question.
And where's that? Is that your website?
This is my website. You can go to k9l.io and then find that in the sea of very sporadic blog posts. I think I write like once every 6 or 7 years. Probably should do more, but yes. There was one more hand, I think, here.
Yes, we have a question on one. So CSS is generally underrated, and people get by on just knowing just enough CSS.
Yes.
So how do you?
How do I get better at CSS? I wrote a parser. I did a whole thing on, it's a good question. I think that CSS is incredibly complicated. I think there are like, thousands of declarations of different types of declarations that you can use. But honestly, I think that there's two really important features for a web developer. One of those is MDN, because it is world-class documentation. It will explain everything like really well, much better than the specs. And the other thing is the developer tools, and the developer tools are next to none. They're just amazing developer tools that like give you a really truly interactive experience, and you can kind of just use those. But if you do want to get further into it, I would encourage you to read the specs. They are dense, they are pretty difficult to read, but they are the manual for the web. Yeah, and everyone from application engineers to browser engineers to the authors of MDN content use these specs because they are the source of truth. And so if you really want to know how something works, for example, how identifiers tokenize, you can read the specs and truly understand it. But it is a lot of effort, yeah.
Last question from the audience. No. Thank you very much, Keith.
Thank you.